Gary is the Corporate Social Responsibility Manager for Kathmandu. Among other things, Gary's had a 20-year career with the New Zealand Police. He's also worked for an international human rights agency where he spent 4 years investigating cases of modern slavery around the world, working undercover inside criminal networks trafficking women and children into the commercial sex industry. So he's got a lot of on-the-ground experience there. In 2011, Gary launched a New Zealand anti-trafficking organisation to combat human trafficking and modern slavery in the Asia-Pacific region. And then in 2016, he accepted this role that he's in now with Kathmandu. Today, Gary's going to talk to us about some of the challenges of practical implementation of supply chain transparency. Welcome, Gary.
Kia ora, good morning. Thanks, Tania. Several years ago, I was in a brothel in Cambodia. The brothel owner brought two girls into the room who were aged around 14 or 15 years old. He said that for $30 I could choose either girl and do whatever I wanted to them for 1 hour. I indicated that these girls were exactly not what I was looking for, and I went to leave, and he said, "Oh, okay. I know what you want." He left the room, and he came back a few moments later with two girls. This is the brothel itself. He came back into the room a few moments later with two girls who were 6 years old. And he said for $30 I could choose either girl and do what I wanted to her for 1 hour. Over the next 3 weeks in that village, I documented more than 50 children between the ages of 5 and 12 years old, most of whom had been trafficked from Vietnam. And every day, large numbers of men from every nation, creed and race, including New Zealand, arrived in that village to prey on those children. $30 US an hour times 50 children, an average of around 5 sales a day, is more than 10,000 New Zealand dollars a day. That's more than 70,000 New Zealand dollars a week in a very, very poor part of the world. The wife of the local police commander used to visit each brothel at the end of the day to collect earnings, a percentage of the earnings. So unsurprisingly, when the human rights group I was working for took the evidence that I had collected to the local authorities, there was a large unwillingness to do anything about it. Because we were headquartered in Washington, DC, we took our covert video footage to the US ambassador to Cambodia. He then arranged a meeting with the Cambodian Prime Minister and indicated that if Cambodia wanted the $35 million US in trade to continue, he needed to act. Several weeks later, we were given 30 police officers to assist in a staged buy-bust operation. The goal was to rescue the children and facilitate the arrest of the perpetrators responsible. In police speak, it was a complete cluster, which means that everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Corruption, ineptitude, and ego, my own included, led to a breakdown in communication and a tip-off to some of those involved. Of the children that I had identified, given gifts to, and in some cases promised to rescue, only 6 of the original 50 were successfully rescued. This is not an image of me carrying a 6-year-old girl out of a brothel. For me, this will forever be an image of leaving 44 children behind. We subsequently learned that because those 44 children had been covertly recorded by my camera as potential witnesses, they posed a threat to the entire criminal enterprise. Some of them were therefore permanently disposed of. I ultimately spent 8 years in the field investigating cases of modern slavery. And during that time, we were able to rescue a few hundred women and children. However, we ultimately failed to rescue many thousand. At the end of it all, I ended up depressed, divorced, full of despair, and completely burned out. So this morning I'd like to share a few things that I learned along the way. And in good Kiwi way, potentially call BS on a few things as well, in the hope that it is of benefit. The first lie that I was invited to let go on this journey into slavery and oppression is the illusion of separation. In other words, as long as victims of modern slavery remain objects rather than subjects in our eyes, they will forever remain separate from us, deserving our pity and sympathy along with a few well-meaning policy changes and law reviews. In 2019, New Zealand and my city was forever changed when the terror attack on our Muslim community occurred. Our Prime Minister and our nation responded with the words, "We suffer with you, and we are one." For many, it was this stance or breakdown in separation that allowed us to truly see the victims and their families not as them or other, but as us. Yesterday we heard Brent say that it is simply about treating others as you would like to be treated. From my experience, I have only found this to be possible when I truly see myself in the other. This girl is not Vietnamese. She's not victim. And she's not slave. She is my daughter and she is yours. Ultimately, she is us. The wisdom of the ages remains the same today as it was in the beginning, namely the invitation to start with ourselves. And as we heard yesterday, to become aware of and recognise that our viewpoint is just that, a limited view from a very, very small point. The ancients remind us, and modern psychology confirms, that we do not see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. Therefore, until our perception changes, until our lens of the world is transformed, nothing is going to change. It will only be a polite rearranging of the furniture, not the much needed construction of a new room. Secondly, I'd like to call BS on the idea that we can fight against modern slavery. Fighting against and the oppositional energy it generates leads us back into the comparison, competition, and aggression that perpetuates the same system that gave birth to slavery in the first place, only in a different form. Our egos love the idea of conquering evil, my own included, and for a good part of my life I sucked my identity, significance, purpose, meaning, and worth out of what I was doing on this heroic journey. But what Viktor Frankl teaches us from a Nazi death camp, Martin Luther King from a Mississippi jail, Nelson Mandela from a South African prison, and a 15-year-old girl from Myanmar named Esther, brutalised inside a Thai brothel, is that we don't fight against slavery. Paradoxically, we rest in and build upon, in ever-expanding circles, our inherent human dignity and freedom. Simon Sinek calls it a just cause, something we stand for and believe in, not something we oppose. He says it is easy to rally people against something because our emotions run hot when we are angry or afraid. Being for something, in contrast, is about feeling inspired. Being for ignites the human spirit and fills us with hope and optimism. Being against is about vilifying, demonizing, or rejecting. Being for is about inviting all to join in a common cause. Being against focuses our attention on the things we can see in order to elicit a reaction. Being for focuses our attention on the as yet uncreated frame in order to spark our imaginations. Being against creates a common enemy and sets up a winnable or finite game, falsely leading us to believe that we can defeat it once and for all. Being for gives us a positive cause to advance and rally around. The impact of these two perceptions is a lot more than semantics. It affects how we see the challenge and therefore impacts our thoughts, ideas, and actions on how we will then contribute. The first offers us a problem to solve. The second offers a vision of possibility and empowerment. We are not inspired to reduce modern slavery. Rather, we are inspired to increase the number of people who are fully alive, embodying dignity and freedom. Another reason we cannot fight against modern slavery is because we live in such a deeply interconnected universe that we would ultimately be fighting against ourselves. A significant part of my life and yours exists only because of modern slavery. If you have a diamond on your finger, chocolate in your diet, or a smartphone in your pocket, you have slaves working for you. According to slaveryfootprint.org, I have 33 slaves currently working to maintain my lifestyle. And even if we care enough to change our lifestyle, many New Zealand consumers are not willing to give up their $5 t-shirts or their shrimp for the barbecue. Once again, this myth relies on the illusion of separation, that the evil we seek to destroy is outside ourselves, somewhere out there, scapegoated in some evil person. Instead of fighting against modern slavery or against ourselves and our inadvertent role in it, the greater invitation is to participate in ways that expand the freedom and dignity of every human being to thrive as we ourselves aspire to. Which brings me to our existing business model. Kathmandu was one of 85 New Zealand businesses that signed the open letter that was presented to the Minister yesterday, asking the government to initiate an inquiry into a New Zealand Modern Slavery Act. Indeed, Kathmandu played a key role in both the collaboration and the content of the letter in partnership with Trade Aid, World Vision and Walk Free. But as was said many times yesterday, new laws and policies and strategies on their own are not enough. Yesterday we heard some great examples of how different NGOs, businesses and government departments are responding to this crisis. However, until we proactively address the root of the problem, it will all remain but a polite rearranging of the furniture on an already sinking ship. In their book, Addressing Modern Slavery, authors Nolan and Boosma state that one of the limitations of modern slavery legislation is that although very well-meaning, it is aimed at treating the symptoms rather than tackling the underlying causes, the very nature of the existing business model. Unless there is a significant change in the way we see the world, our mindset, and operate as businesses, none of the strategies submitted by any entity as part of a Modern Slavery Act reporting requirement are going to be effective in any meaningful or sustainable way. As long as the primary duty of companies is to make a profit, this will continue to justify driving down costs through outsourcing and legitimise cutthroat competition among suppliers. This in turn creates the ideal conditions for modern slavery to thrive. In fact, as long as the primary duty and purpose of business is to make a profit, and that remains the only rule by which we measure success, then modern slavery will remain the most successful business model in the world, earning more than the four most profitable businesses in the world combined. A new mindset and a new business model is necessary to find solutions to challenges that our old mindset created. When it comes to how we see the world or our mindset, most of you will be familiar with the fixed mindset, which is based on the belief that ability and intelligence is a fixed trait. The growth mindset asserts that our abilities and intelligence can be developed through hard work and effective strategies. But both fixed and growth mindset primarily focus on individual learning, achievement, and improvement without facilitating a deeper transformation in a person's underlying frame of reference. There is also an implicit assumption that growth is always good, when we all know that incessant growth or growth for growth's sake is the very reason we are destroying life on this planet. Central to the benefit mindset is the understanding that we are not separate individuals going it alone, but interdependent beings who belong to a global ecosystem. It understands that our capacity to realise our full potential is less about how smart, driven or growth-oriented we are, and more about how well we are able to honour our interdependency, compassionately attend to our individual and collective shadows, and become partners in the well-being of all people. We are currently conditioned to see well-being through a very individualistic lens that privileges personal concerns such as self-care, but neglects the more collective concerns of community care, planetary care, and intergenerational care. This interdependent view of life and well-being is, of course, not new, but a sacred understanding of our kinship and deep connection with the world, which many faith traditions and First Nations people have long been aware of. The benefit mindset has allowed us to create alternatives to the existing business model, and just one example of this is benefit corporations, or B Corps. The very real threat of planetary collapse has convinced many that any sense of maintaining the existing business model is delusional, to put it nicely. The COVID pandemic has only reinforced this. Certified B Corps embody a new kind of business that balances purpose and profit. They are legally required to consider the impact of their decisions on their workers, customers, suppliers, community, and the environment. B Corps are now a rapidly growing global community, driving a global movement of people using business as a force for good. Adopting and embracing the benefit mindset that lies at the heart of the B Corp movement is critical to effectively respond to the social challenges of our time, including and especially modern slavery. Just one example of its application can be seen in global supply chains. Modern slavery continues to thrive throughout the world in large part because it is not visible. Making our supply chains more transparent is therefore critical. However, the existing business model relies on competition, mistrust, fear, and shame to motivate and drive change. So in this context, requiring our suppliers to be transparent about their weaknesses, to highlight the management systems that are faulty, and to open the door on the skeletons in the closet that they would rather keep hidden requires a massive amount of vulnerability, trust, and courage. It is why, for the most part, auditing and compliance has not led in any meaningful way to sustainable social transformation. If we want our suppliers to raise modern slavery concerns without the risk of being penalised for doing so, a new mindset and a new business model is necessary. Equally importantly, as businesses, if we are to be transparent about our imperfections and to risk the naming and shaming that Kiwis love to engage in, we need a new mindset and a new model. Addressing modern slavery stands and falls on the ability to let go of our corporate ego and be transparent about the imperfections in our businesses. This will require the support and collaboration of all sectors, essentially all of you, government, NGO, and media. Otherwise, when a business is open about their weaknesses and the real challenges they are facing, they will be cut down and silenced by an archaic naming and shaming approach, and in so doing fertilise the very soil that keeps modern slavery flourishing in the shadows. These new models of business are not just theory. For the past 6 months, Kathmandu and Deloitte have been co-hosting a group of more than 25 New Zealand businesses from a variety of sectors called, as a polite slap in the face to the competitive advantage, the collaborative advantage. Each month we meet to address issues related to ethical and sustainable sourcing, but we do so with the intention of collaboratively adding value and being of benefit to all stakeholders. We share best practices as well as our mistakes with our direct competitors and learn what it means to take authentic action to achieve our shared wider economic and environmental goals. Just in the last couple of weeks, Kerry and Charlene from Countdown courageously, sitting across the table from Foodstuffs, talked about the very real challenges they were facing in their supply chain. And Foodstuffs responded in kind with vulnerability, transparency, and courage. As Buckminster Fuller famously said, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. So far, every nation that has sought to address modern slavery has created a Modern Slavery Act, and as I said earlier, we absolutely support this. However, based on the mindset and the new model of business that I've shared today, hopefully you can see that in doing so, each nation has defined who they are by what they are against, rather than more clearly defining and stating what they are for. The values that guide our nation are grounded in fairness, equality and inclusion. All forms of slavery and exploitation are therefore the antithesis of everything we stand for. The higher and more powerful invitation is therefore to frame our response in terms of our shared values. In other words, let the actions we take be an authentic response based on who we are, not an externally imposed international responsibility that we reluctantly feel obliged to adhere to. At the end of the day, yesterday, David and Brent asked us how New Zealand could once again be a leader in this space, not just scramble to catch up and follow the example of other nations. In keeping with our Kiwi heritage and culture, rather than a modern slavery act, what if we instead created the Freedom Act of New Zealand that absolutely addressed the full continuum of modern slavery, but does so in the context of the mana and freedom we embody, and therefore be of benefit to the entire world? In 2019, I was in Ho Chi Minh City visiting some Kathmandu suppliers, and while there I met with the director of a local anti-slavery organisation called Alliance Anti-Traffic. In keeping with best practice, we signed a memorandum of understanding which would allow AAT to act on our behalf in the event that any cases of modern slavery were detected in our supply chain. They know the language, the culture, local laws, and most importantly, they have access to trusted officials and aftercare facilities. The director told me that for many years they had made little progress with the Vietnamese government, who did not recognise modern slavery nor see any urgency to address it. He said all of that changed a few years ago when he obtained some video footage from another NGO showing large numbers of Vietnamese children being sold to sex tourists from around the world. He said when he played the video for the Vietnamese government ministers, they fell silent. Their faces turned white, and their hearts, along with their political will, was forever changed. He said it led to the creation of their own modern slavery legislation. He showed me the video he had played to them, and I realised it was my own footage, recorded some 15 years ago inside a brothel in Cambodia as part of an operation that I had forever determined to be a complete failure. I mentioned Esther earlier. Esther came from a very poor family in Myanmar. At 15, she was promised, like many young girls from Myanmar, a good job in Thailand where she could make enough money to send home and support her family. She travelled with the blessing of her family, but upon arrival she was taken to a brothel where she was imprisoned until they could find someone who was willing to pay the price to rape a virgin. It took several weeks, but eventually the terms of business were met and the product was sold. Esther put up such a fight that they had to use masking tape to tie her to the bed. After she was brutalised, she was put out with the numerous other women and girls in the brothel who were being sold many times a day for many months. Eventually, one of my colleagues was able to infiltrate the brothel and, posing as a customer, was able to speak with Esther. He subsequently facilitated a raid by the local police, and Esther, along with the others, was rescued. Once those responsible had been arrested, they took Esther back to the brothel to collect her very few belongings. Inside the bedroom that had effectively been her prison, the team noticed some writing on the wall above her bed where she had been repeatedly raped for profit. When they asked her what it said, Esther explained that it was a poem from the Old Testament that her parents had read to her since she was a very young child. and she translated what it said. God, you are my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? God, you are the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When evil men advance against me to devour my flesh, even then I will trust that you are good, that you are for me, and that I am loved. When it comes to rugby, may we remain the best in the world. But when it comes to modern slavery, may we let go of our national ego and seek to be the best for the world. After all, our national plan of action to address modern slavery is already embedded in our nation's blueprint, our national anthem. God of nations at thy feet. Nations. All nations. In other words, there is only the human tribe. We are all included. We are one. In the bonds of love we meet, otherwise called a benefit mindset. Hear our voices, we entreat. All our voices, which means and requires transparency and collaboration. God defend our free land. Thank you.